Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media live event. It is so wonderful seeing everybody behind the scenes here. I was looking at where everybody was dialing in from, and it is so amazing to see that we have an international audience here today. So, wherever it is you're dialing in from, whether it's your morning, your evening, I'm here in California. I know my guest is in Texas, so we're all in different time zones here, but it is so great to see everybody. I just want to welcome you to our Soulcast Media live event, where today we're going to be talking about leading with heart and humility. Now, sometimes when it comes to the workplace, when we're thinking about getting our work done, we often don't think about those two words, heart and humility, which is why I'm so excited to have my guest join me here today to talk about something that I think should be top of mind, because that is great leadership. So before we get started with today's event, I want to do a quick housekeeping tip. First of all, if everybody can hear me, the audio sounds okay, give me a thumbs up on your end, because it would be great to know that the audio is working, since I'm only getting to see what's on my screen. So give me a thumbs up if the audio is working fine on your end. Now, today's event, it's going to be about 45 minutes long here. It's a conversation between my guest, Dr. Todd Dewett, and I, but it's also a conversation where we want to hear from you. Meaning, if you have any questions for us, we are here for you and we want to be sure to answer it. So you have the chat function, which I know many of you were jotting down where you're dialing in from. So please let us know. It's so great to see some familiar faces. If this is the first time you're joining, welcome. We host these Soulcast Media live events every other week or so, and I always have fantastic guests come on, and we talk all things communications and leadership. So, without further ado, let's get started with this event. My guest here today is Dr. Todd Dewett, and he's actually no stranger. He's actually been on Soulcast Media Live one other time. And honestly, it's such a joy to bring him on, because he really is an expert when it comes to talking about leadership. And what's also very exciting is Todd has a new book that just came out, which we're going to be talking about shortly. So without further ado, let me pull up my guest. Hey, Todd, how's it going?
Hey, Jessica, great to see you. Thanks for having me back.
I'm so glad you're here. So, Todd, for our folks, by the way, Dr. Todd Dewett, I always want to give that shout out.
Thanks.
So, for those who don't know you or aren't familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do.
Well, thank you for asking. I mean, the journey's pretty simple. I started in big box consulting with some names people have heard of, Anderson and Ernst & Young, or now Accenture and Ernst & Young. Realized I didn't fit, wanted to study business in a different way, ended up getting a PhD in organizational behavior from Texas A&M, and fell in love with studying business from the ivory tower. Got the degree, became a professor at a school in Ohio for 10 years, teaching mostly MBA students, and I was a dean for a while before the next calling hit me, Jessica, and I realized, oh, there's a third career I want to try, maybe a fourth later, I'm not sure. So now, for the last decade, I make courses mostly for LinkedIn and write books and give a lot of speeches and a whole lot of informal coaching on LinkedIn and elsewhere.
In fact, that's actually how we know each other. We are both LinkedIn learning instructors, and it has been such an amazing journey creating these courses for this platform that we're all on right now. I have about 10 courses, but that is nowhere near how many courses you have, Todd. How many courses do you have?
Dear listeners, she called me before we went live. She said, "You're one of the OGs." It made me laugh. I've been with them for just over 10 years now, and I think I've got like 40 courses live and more on the way. So we've certainly been around a little while.
Yeah. It's funny whenever I do these intros with my guests, because it's always fascinating to hear where folks came from, what their background is. I mean, in fact, Soulcast Media wasn't what I've done my whole life. Prior to Soulcast, I used to be a former TV journalist, and then I transferred into the work that I do today, which I absolutely love. So it's interesting, Todd, for you that you made such a is drastic. I don't know even know if drastic is the right word here, but to even go off and do your own thing. Let me just first ask, like, how did you even come to that realization that I want to teach in this way?
You know, it's interesting, and I'm going to give you an unexpected answer. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and on the side, when I was a professor, I was an entrepreneur, starting small version of what I'm doing now. And then my ex-wife, my first wife, who's one of my best friends, came to me one day, and we were making dinner for our kids and put them to bed, and she just had this look, and I knew the look, and I said, "What's wrong with you?" Because we had just developed this brother-sister thing that's been beautiful ever since, and she just started kind of breaking down and saying, "I'm not sure where I want to be. I'm not sure my best futures in this city." We were living in Dayton, Ohio, which I love. Hi, Dayton. If anyone's watching, I miss you and I love you. But she has family in Houston, Texas, more opportunities for all kinds of careers in Houston, more interesting, broader culture for our children. And I was really interested in that idea. And I rolled the dice, and I'm proud of this because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I let go of a job for life. I was a tenured senior faculty member and went and rolled the dice to speak and write and make courses full time. It really was going to just be a side hustle. I was going to be a professor until I was done, until she planted that idea in my head. And somehow I grew the courage to make the choice, and I did it.
And isn't that what this is, though? A lot of times, where people go in their career happens because somebody plants this seed. Somebody gave them that inspiration. They empowered them for them to think, wait, maybe I can do that. Okay, so let's talk about today's topic, which is about leadership, heart, humility, but also about this book that you have. And I'm curious to get your thoughts, with this book, Dancing with Monsters. Do you have a book around you?
Oh,
I
sure.
can see it.
Promo, shameless promo.
Yes. Dancing with Monsters. So, I'm curious to get your thoughts, even before you even put pen to paper, which I know the book writing process, it's tough. So kudos to you, Todd. What was your hope with this book?
Well, this is my least difficult one to write. I hear you. Sometimes getting out the words can be challenging. The truth is, this came from something of a failure. I tried to write, I'm just being honest, I tried to write novels a few times over the years, and I had no success. I completed some projects and felt good about it, but they're things that you'll never read. I'll just say it that way. The last one, the one I'm done with now, had a kernel of an idea I thought was interesting about a vampire who works in an office and has to deal with some issues. And that idea just stuck with me. And I thought to myself, do I have to let go of the idea, even if I'm going to admit once and for all, I can do that and that, but I'm not a novelist? And I decided no, because there was an idea I'd held on to somewhere else in my head for many, many years about adding to that world out there of business book fables, the more fanciful, fantasy-filled, creative business books that we've seen. And I just thought that was maybe right in between the novel world and the traditional business book world. And I wanted to give it a shot. And this is a true story. And so I just said, let's do this. And I had some ideas. I took some notes, and then I started writing the same day. And 6 hours later, had the first draft of the book done.
Holy moly, really?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was gonna say for my book, it was just grinding and grinding and grinding where like it took years. But for me, I don't know about you, I go through these spurts of inspiration where I see something, I read something, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to start writing. Is that the same for you?
Oh, sure. It's difficult sometimes to explain to people who don't do creative work, and this is. I hope this doesn't sound weird to anyone. But when you do something that's significantly creative, you can't always control it the way you would control just doing less creative tasks on a schedule every day.
Mhm.
Sometimes you feel it, and the joke with my wife and I is when you're feeling it, when the flow is there, you put other things off, you cancel that meeting, and you let it go because that's not always there. So I hear you. You got to try and make it happen, and when it does happen, you got to clear your schedule and let it flow.
I think all of us, though, have both sides, right? And I mean, even in the work that we do, for me, I have just kind of like the typical, I just got to get things done. And arguably, that's easier. Sometimes it's just easy just to go in, open my documents, and just kind of knock things out. But when you're trying to be creative, and this is where the brainstorming comes in, it's a lot harder. Actually, by the way, for those who are watching right now, let us know if that has resonated with you. Have you ever felt that too, where when you're tasked with needing to brainstorm something, that's arguably harder sometimes than actually getting the nuts and bolts done. I don't know. That's how it is for me, Todd. Okay, Todd. If somebody were to ask you,
Yeah.
what's the biggest lesson in this book, Dancing with Monsters? What's kind of like your 1-2 sentence answer?
It's a recognition that you are imperfect and face challenges, but you are also completely enough. And realizing that is step one to really leveraging that to go produce more than you ever thought you could. It's about facing fears and finding your true self.
Where did that idea start? Like, why was that the lesson?
I look as a professional observer, writer, advisor person. I look for widely applicable ideas so that I don't just get too lost talking about things I find interesting that might not be
Mhm.
as helpful to others. And when I think about that, a handful of recurring things show up year after year after year. And one of them is some of us want to pull the trigger on that project or that career move or that school degree, whatever it might be. And we don't more often than we do because we're scared of that which we can't control. We're scared of failure, et cetera, et cetera. It is darn near a universal experience. And boy, I've experienced it as well. I just like to look at people and say, I know you're imperfect. I am too. That should not limit you. And once people actually start to believe that idea, it's hilarious how much more behavioral momentum they start to cook up.
But it's human nature though, right? For all of us to feel like we're not good enough to do that or to not even put ourselves out there. I think about the book that I'm writing too, just because it's so fresh on my mind. I started that journey about 3 years ago, and it was just kind of this going to be this a DIY project, to tell you the truth, because I never thought people would be interested in it. But like I said, sometimes it just takes one person to be like, "Holy crap, this is good! Like you need to go out and talk about this." And that's what I did. Okay, so Todd, for folks who do struggle with just this feeling you're talking about, feeling like they're not good enough, feeling that perhaps they're overshadowed at work, people don't value them, how can somebody get out of that mentality?
Well, context, this is slightly outside the book, but only a little. Context is everything. You have a predisposition for a bunch of different things. We call it personality, we call it temperament, we call it different things in the social sciences. But the truth is, you have what you were given at birth and that you kept with you into young adulthood. That meaningfully, in terms of personality, doesn't change a whole lot over a lifetime. Now, what you do with that foundation, whatever it might be, can vary widely depending on context. So, partially the answer to you is to realize that you're just fine. You got to figure out how to admit that, how to understand that, and then how to play with the context around you to maximize that. That might be no longer associating as much with certain people. That might be really building stronger bonds with certain people feed you on the skill side and on the mental side of life. It might be a need to step away for a short period and stop or start certain habits outside of work. It might be an educational pursuit. There's you and what you were born with, but then just don't forget there's what you choose to do with it. And there's a lot of contextual pieces around you that you can start playing with to do better.
Everything that you just said, I completely agree. And in fact, I feel motivated to be like, you're right. Like, we got to go out there. We got to surround ourselves with the right people. But Todd, I'm sure you see this all the time where people are like, it sounds great, but I just have so much work I got to
Yeah.
do. I got a long to do list. How do I find that time? I have kids, I have housework. I mean, how do you even prioritize something, as you're saying, is very important to basically achieving the best of our
I have a
versions of
really, it's a great question. I have a really difficult, honest answer for that. And success is a great deal about sacrifice. And most people don't like that notion, that idea, because it can be tough. It can be very tough. For example, I had two kids in elementary school when I quit a high-paying job for life as a professor to go be an entrepreneur and roll the dice. That's a risk. There's no doubt about that. But the truth is, you have to make a choice and you have to think long term. Are you going to be happy if you're safe? Good for you. That's most people to some degree, and that's okay. I don't denigrate that in any way. It makes complete sense to
Mhm.
me, and it's how I started my career too. Or do you want to roll the dice once, twice, three times, maybe more, and try and self actualize a little bit more? How much will you take on that risk? How much will you save? How much will you prep your key relationships to be open to the fact that you're going to roll the dice and really strive and you can't control the outcome? You can just get honest about the reality I just described, and then you're going to feel a little more like, okay, do I want to sit here for another year or 5 years or 10 years before I roll the dice or not? And this is what I say to people. If you start playing a negotiation with yourself about how many years you need to prepare, you're never going to be ready. It's kind of similar to having children. You're never going to be ready if you keep saying, I got to do this first, then this first. So be smart, save money, get advisors smarter than you. But if you really want to try something crazy, try younger than older. That's kind of useful, but there's no wrong time to start optimizing what you're capable of. Just have your eyes open and be willing to learn when the bumps in the road happen, because they will. Jessica, you know this, they will happen, right?
Yeah. I'm curious for our audience. By the way, we have over 60 folks who are dialed in right now, which is
Cool.
amazing. Would you, this is a question for my audience here, do you consider yourself risk adverse, or are you the kind of person who loves risk? Let us know in the chat function. I'd be very curious to get your thoughts. In our audience here, do you consider yourself more risk adverse or you love taking risk? And this goes into, for me, I'm pretty risk adverse. Maybe this is a cultural thing, personality. I've always been generally pretty scared to like go out and do my own thing because you just never know what people are going to say, what they're going to think. Is it going to be successful? Am I going to leave that high paying job to start my own thing and maybe make $0? It's pretty scary, right? But I will say for me, at least when I first started Soulcast Media, I was doing actually stuff on the side too. It wasn't that I necessarily put all my eggs in this one basket and was like, all right, let's see how it goes.
Sure.
I still was creating a little buffer. Was that kind of the same for you?
Oh, you got it. I was side hustling for 5, 6 years as a tenured professor before I said to myself, is that side hustle legitimately sustainable before I get rid of the main job? And I think that if you don't have good proof of concept, then you're really taking a big risk. So yes, a side hustle, nights and weekends. That's how so many entrepreneurs start what they're doing, nights and weekends. If that sacrifice doesn't sound good to you, then maybe the entrepreneurial route isn't for you. That's not good or bad. You're just looking for where you fit best. Sometimes it's right in the middle of a corporate hierarchy. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's a small business you work for. Sometimes it's a small business you start. There is no right answer. Which one sounds best for you?
It's funny, I'm seeing a lot of the comments come in, and I would say majority of our audience is saying risk adverse, but then we see Danielle here. I love taking risks, the biggest growth. Danielle, I love that mindset. It's true though. I found it is uncomfortable risk at times. Sarah, you're saying generally risk adverse. There's been a couple of occasions where I have taken that risk, but it was scary and not something I usually do. Sean here is saying calculated risk can be a good thing. I think that's the key word here, calculated.
I want to go back to context because you say you're not too full of risk love. I got to tell you, you're doing some interesting things. Just holding lives with crazy people like me is not something a risk averse person normally does. And then for all your interesting viewers that are having these great comments, I want to share with them an interesting reality I first learned as a scholar back in the day, because my first focus as a scholar before I morphed into straight leadership guy was creativity and innovation. So we know a lot about how that happens or doesn't at work. And people who will correctly self-identify as risk averse, when they're in the right environment with the right relationships and the right boss saying the right things, it's amazing how much they'll be a part of a team who takes principled, smart risks to move forward and do something different than the status quo tomorrow. I've seen it a million times.
Because you kind of need both, Ro. You need both people on a team. Somebody who can think big, think courageously, but then you also need the people who are like, wait a second, have we thought about this? Have we thought about that? You really need both. It's kind of like a marriage, right? Both sides balance each other out. Ideally, ideally.
No, you're not wrong. I actually mentioned in the book, there's probably 20 themes mentioned, 3 or 4 more prominent than others. One of them that's mentioned is the talent versus chemistry debate that's existed in the sciences and in pop culture. All the practitioners like us talk about it all the time. It's been said there's a war for talent so many times. And I often say, nah, that's a really misfocused thing to say. What there really is a war for chemistry, because it is so true and so common that good talent, when they don't get along well, understand each other, and be supportive to each other, perform in mediocre ways. That is extremely common, just as common as good but not great talent getting together and doing all the teamwork things we know help a team and outperforming the so-called better talent. It happens all the time.
Dean here is saying, I enjoy reasonable and responsible risk, but I do like to eat too. Dean, we love you. You're friends with both Todd and I. Thank you, Dean, for being here. I
Uh,
love that. We love a good meal. Okay. What you just said, though, Todd, was very interesting. Talent and chemistry. And I feel like this chemistry is something that I've really never thought too much about, but you're right. What does that mean? Chemistry at work.
That means a minute ago, what you said was so apropos, so absolutely on the mark. You said, you need somebody that can do this. You also need somebody that can do this. That's right. There's different components that make up a high functioning team. We're not all equally and very similarly skilled in terms of personality, aptitudes, interest, actual experience. No, a diversity. There's hears that word, and the research says we should keep saying it because more diverse teams on average tend to perform better. The ones that perform the best, however, have this chemistry thing. And that means they're not just lost on a self-focus, lost in their head, chasing their own goals every day. They have an understanding and an appreciation of the other people on the team. They can sense when someone needs to speak. They can sense when someone's flailing and needs help. And they're willing and able to then do so. That's chemistry. And that takes good talent and makes it great 7 days out of 7.
I'm sure there's people in our audience right now who are saying, absolutely, I agree. But what happens if I don't have chemistry with the people on my team, with my manager, with my colleagues who I feel is always trying to sabotage me? How do you deal with that tricky situation?
It is tricky. First thing I do is acknowledge you for asking legit questions, whoever would ask a question like that. So the truth is that you can focus on changing yourself, changing the team, or leaving for other opportunities. If you're going to talk about changing yourself relative to the team, what do they need? What have I done that's not working? What can I start doing? What about me isn't yet helping the team optimize? That gets into self-reflection, possibly the use of coaches and mentors. And then another whole domain is, what can I do for them? Does someone need different type of communication from me? Do they need me to draw a line for them so they can wake up? What do they need from me? How can I change the interactions, or maybe encourage them to do A instead of B? And then there's the third part, the riskiest part by far, is if those first two weren't time consuming enough, Jessica. You have to ask the question, am I worth the investment here where I currently work in this current role? Or is the best use of my time, my energy, my efforts to look for a role elsewhere, another team in the organization, another department, another unit, another company, another industry? Fit is that. I love talking about this topic. I know you do too. It's when people and who they are, how they feel, their personality, what they're good at, what they are skilled at, when that feels natural and you don't have to struggle to really just be you and feel like you're adding value, that's high fit. That's the dream. Maybe 20-30% of us, something like that, have it. I think Jessica has it. I have it in spades. I know I do. And I don't know about you folks listening, but I can tell you it is achievable. It does take thoughtful preparation, and it is not risk-free, but it feels great when you get there.
It feels you feel like you're operating on a different level because you are just working honestly at your highest ability. I imagine though, for many of us though, we sometimes can feel like we're in a situation where we are not being able to maximize our
Sure.
full potential,
Sure.
where because we have a manager who's micromanaging us, we are just stressed, putting out fires, as they would say, or working in silos. A lot of these are very corporate speak, but it's a very real feeling
Sure.
where you feel like you're not being valued. You mentioned maybe looking elsewhere, maybe trying to talk to different people. If people do feel like they're in that situation, can it get better? How can it get better?
I can't tell you how many hours in my career since I started doing this 20 plus years ago. I've spent talking to people who are not happy. And one of the biggest reasons is their supervisor, boss, call them what you like, is not good, doesn't like them, understand them, utilize them, something, right? So they feel limited by different things, but especially that thing. Yes, you can change that. So let me briefly address that and say that person has a higher spot in the hierarchy than you. They have more status and authority than you. So you have to recognize that. You have to say to yourself, first, is this person and how I view them idiosyncratic to me, or is this pretty commonly held? Looking around and listening, maybe politely, quietly talking to make sure you understand that you don't have a very outlier view of that person would be useful before you act. And then if you think to yourself, no, I'm correctly looking at this person, what do you do about it? Well, now you want to ask how long you think you're going to work for them. Are they a wonderful job hopper, always climbing, and you've got 12 months, 24 months maximum with them? Well, enduring that becomes an option you should consider as you do other things in preparation for the wonderful burst of career you'll have when they're gone. But if you think you might be with them for many years, you got two choices: change the relationship or change the location where you work. If you want to change the relationship, ask yourself if it's possible to have a different conversation with them. Sometimes it is because you've never tried, because you see it as maybe a little too risky. But if you can have another conversation with them, give them feedback that they need, not negative and critical, but helpful and honest, to find out what they're really seeing that they're probably sometimes not seeing, then do that. There's risks associated with that. It could blow up in your face. Sometimes there's strength in numbers, and it's 3 of you on the team that need to put your arm around Jim Bob or whatever his name is and say, how are you viewing this issue? Because we weren't sure we were all on the same page. And I just wanted to hope, to get us on the same page, start a new conversation. That is a minefield that can really pay off if you know how to do it. And by the way, if anyone wants to talk through that in your own specific case, just reach out on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to give you my 10 cents. But if that's too risky for you, you either have to endure it or change where you're working.
Okay, you just dropped a bunch of what I call golden nuggets in about 3 minutes. So let me just rehash what you said. You basically said if somebody is in a situation where they're not feeling like they are thriving, it's you want to try to though be objective of, is this a me thing or is it kind of like a bigger issue, right? Because maybe it is really just that relationship, but maybe that manager is fine with other people. And then so just trying to take an objective view, right? Not just dive headfirst into I just need to figure this out, right? So that's kind of the first step. But from there, then you try to navigate what's the next best thing. Do I talk to colleagues? Am I alone? Do they feel this way? Do we tackle it together as a group, right? Do I want to stay there? And I imagine any of these things don't happen quickly or right away. Okay, I want to pivot really quickly, Todd,
Sure.
to communications because that is, of course, what we talk
Yeah.
about here at Soulcast Media. So, leveraging what we just talked about, navigating difficult conversations with our manager, with our
Yeah.
team. What's your approach when it comes to talking about tricky situations at work?
Well, it really depends. There's not a simplistic way to say you should do it this way because it depends on your context. I'm always thinking about perspective, situations, context. And this relates directly to the book, by the way, because when I give some basic, a handful of leadership 101 ideas I want people to consider to help them grow as leaders, one of them is called, be candid, not just positive. So when I think about difficult conversations, the question is, what type of culture are you in? Is it normal or not for you and your boss to have more difficult, I'll say, conversations? Or is it, if it's uncommon, you could have the best word choice in the world, choose the right timing and setting, etc., and still have a very difficult situation that you don't feel is productive. So what I'd like to tell people is that candor isn't the only goal you're striving for. I wish I had the guts to say what needs to be said, even if it's measured and respectful. Say what needs to be said instead of biting my tongue like I often feel I should. Well, it's not just trying to find the bravery to be candid. You got to make sure you have the right situation where you need positivity and candor, not just positivity like so many preach today. It's a beautiful thing. I love it, but it's only the foundation that gives you the ability to more productively chew on difficult things you need to chew on. So when people talk about, is critical feedback good or not? I go, well, let's talk about the people involved and the relationship they have, because sometimes candor sounds horrifyingly toxic. Other times, candor sounds like needed, digestible, thoughtful feedback. So it depends, is a legitimate answer there.
It really does depend. And I feel like just asking that one question and trying to get like the ultimate answer, you can never get that ultimate answer, right? It really does depend on many, many things. But it's finding that balance between positivity and candor and not doing one more than the other necessarily.
Absolutely. We find cultures usually err one or the other. And then I have to tell them, you're out of balance. People need to be honest here, not just sweet to each other. You know?
This is true. And I think a lot of us, because we hate having tricky conversations, difficult conversation, we try to just sometimes be nice about it. And that's all it is. We're just being nice. But if we want progress, if we want things moving forward, if we want things to happen, you need both, right?
Absolutely, both are essential, no doubt about it. Especially if you, this is funny to me, Jessica. So many people on their websites and on their marketing will talk about creativity and innovation and change. And the truth is, they're often just platitudes. They're not lived values. Until you have that balance you're talking about of the positivity, the civility, as well as the candor and forthright behaviors and conversations, you won't see anything that approaches innovation because they're both required.
So I want to do a quick reset right now for those who are just joining, who just jumped on. I'm here with my friend Dr. Todd Dewett, and we're talking about, we're talking about all things leadership, communications, how to show up in the workplace. And we're here talking about something that, of course, very close to my heart, very close to your heart. And by the way, if there's more questions, please throw it into the chat function or comments so that Todd and I can get to it. So one of the other things I want to talk about for your book,
Hmm.
Dancing with Monsters, is tell us about who are you trying to inspire with this book? If you had that dream reader, who would that be? Where would they be on their career journey? And how would they find inspiration in your book, Todd?
That's a great question. I think that people aspiring and they know they're close to being formally appointed as leaders within their organizations, first line, second line, even third, in middle management, that's the best. This is definitely not written for seniors. It's written for aspirational frontline and middle management. Great refresher for middle management. It's fast. It reminds you of some basics that you probably haven't thought about and should, but it does so in a way that's quite new. It does so with a crazy fable about a few misfit monsters who need to learn some lessons. And it does so by rephrasing the delivery of some of those maxims. For example, it's not just, hey, you need more candor. It's you need candor and kindness. You're right. You need to have people really think through issues that are difficult, that they won't always enjoy, but you need to do so in a way that makes them hear you because they know you're being honest. And they know that when it's time for you to be honest and be vulnerable, that you'll do the same thing. So there's a nuanced balance that people need.
Going with that, this book is targeted to aspiring managers, new managers. In fact, we have a question from Ruben right now. I am entering my first management role. Congratulations, Ruben. Where do I start? I mean, I'm sure read Todd's book, number one. But I mean, where so Todd, what's your thought on where does somebody start when they're now managing people, which honestly requires a whole different set of
Sure.
skills other than just doing your work?
You just nailed it. I don't need to answer, Jessica. That was perfect. So, aside from my book and many other resources that are great for you, from courses at LinkedIn to elsewhere, you want to start by realizing the skills that got you where you are aren't good enough to get you where you're going. That's an honest statement. We promote people most of the time because of their functional skill in a given area, not because they have the amazing people skills that are usually the hallmark of effective leaders. So, most people get promoted and then they go, this is not what I expected. It's a little more challenging and strange than I thought. I'm not sure how to make these people who now report to me do what I think we're supposed to be doing. Well, why is that shocking? You've never done it before. This is a new skill that you're learning. And it comes down to Jessica's world, all about communication. It's now no longer about you. It's about everyone else even more than you. So where do you start? You need some feedback about you in a real way at a level you've not had before. That can come from journaling, meditation, and introspection. That can come from a coach, internal or external. That can come from a mentor older than you or even younger than you if you're in your 40s and 50s. That can come from assessments. That can come from coursework you take online. There's many different avenues. No excuse to walk around today blind to your true strengths and weaknesses. That's for sure. That's the place to start.
I feel oftentimes school, for example, doesn't necessarily teach us how to be a good manager. They teach us how to work hard, be a great individual contributor, but the art of people management, that's a whole new skill that unfortunately you don't learn until you're now put in that role, which is a great thing, right? I mean, you're put into that role
Sure.
because somebody sees a potential in you, but oftentimes you're tripping and falling along the way, managing people. They get angry, you get frustrated, nobody's happy, right? But I do think the education starts now, regardless of where we are, what role we're in right now. And when you said it best, there's so many resources. I mean, I think
Right.
Todd and I are going to continuously plug LinkedIn Learning because we're LinkedIn Learning instructors. But that's really it. It's understanding people, what motivates them. Do they feel cared for? Our topic today, heart and humility, right? One of the other questions that we have that I want to answer, which is a really good one.
Sure.
So, what do you do if you're reporting to your manager and you're struggling with workload, people, and you're not receiving any constructive feedback or change? So perhaps you're just overworked, overloaded, but you're not actually having that good conversation with your manager to change the situation. Any thoughts on that, Todd?
Yeah, just off the cuff, sure, real quick. Number one, what are the outcomes that you're facing that are making you feel that that might be the case? If it's just an elevated small period of stress, but the work's really still there on time and with quality, you're okay. Let's see if this is going to be temporary or long term before you make any drastic moves. What you should worry about is when you see outcomes that aren't where you need them to be, that means stress has led to less productivity in some form for you. And that's a real alarm for concern. If that starts happening, then you got to say to yourself, not how can I get the feedback my boss I think is supposed to give me, but isn't giving me, but what are the other sources? So really think about that. Talk to your best friend, your spouse, your boss, a mentor, a coach, etc. Maybe even an AI bot in a few years is going to be on that list as well. But
Sure.
go find that input, that insight. So you can't assume that you see yourself and your situation perfectly because humans aren't great at it generally. That's why you selectively and thoughtfully get others involved in helping you see that. That's where you start.
having conversations with people and seeing, are there other areas where we can improve? I mean, I absolutely agree. I say, Chris, yes, tons of LinkedIn learning programs and courses. So yes, absolutely. And I mean, I don't think LinkedIn pays us to continuously promote it like this, but
We
maybe
should.
they should because we talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
All right. So here's another question from Fernando. How do you manage the new generation where everything needs to be sped up, right? So let's say you're talking to new grads, people who are just entering the workforce. I hear a lot of people say, oh my gosh, this new generation, they think differently, they operate differently, they want different things. And, for folks like us, I mean, I've been working for, I don't know, 15-ish years now. I mean, how do people navigate dealing with the new generation coming into the workforce and maybe even now managing them?
It's fascinating, and one of the reasons I wrote a novel, a fable about misfit monsters in a fast, funny way, is because of the takeover of the millennials and Zs, which is fascinating to me, and I think it's going to be useful. It's a more challenging time than ever in terms of generations at the workforce. We have more than ever all operating together, and it's causing changes. Some are choosing to get off of the bandwagon of saying, "Oh, these different generations have different issues, and mine's good, and the others are strange," and all those things we've heard a million times. And they're
Yes.
starting to say, how can I harness this? It's starting to look a lot like the diversity question. Diversity used to be a thing we didn't understand, and now we're starting to go, how can I get more of it? Because when I learn how to manage it, it makes all of us so much better. Generations are quite similar. So my advice to people is elevate sooner than later young, spectacular talent who seem also to be good people, because that sends a million signals, builds a million bridges. Go find the senior people who somehow, whether you can explain it or not, get the youngins and find ways to get them working with them, again, to build understanding, to build bridges. Don't think about programs first. Think about connections between people who are already predisposed to say hello, shake hands, shut up, and learn. I tell anyone over 40, I'm 52, anyone over 40 is supposed to have at least one mentor 10 years or more younger than them, because they
Mm.
are approaching work and thinking about the issues of the day differently than you are. And different isn't bad. It's just different. You can optimize how you work with them when you understand what they're thinking in the first place. And that means you got to go be proactive and get involved.
I love that. It's not just thinking, because oftentimes we just think, oh, we have to connect with people who are more senior than us. It's how we can benefit our career. But you're saying something so valuable. It's connecting with people who are in the younger generation and building that connection with them because they can offer insight that perhaps we never thought of. I mean, just think about, I mean, one thing I think about is like I have younger family members and they're just like, they know all the trends that I'm like, I thought I knew the trends. I definitely don't know the trends, but they do. And it just makes the conversation, the thought process just so much richer when you can just combine minds like that.
Listen, if you have any millennials and Zs listening to this now or later as a video, take my word for it. In the next 20 years, the amount of social capital, intellectual capital, things, experience in the minds of people older than you that's going to be leaving the organizations is astronomically large. Your goal, if you choose to accept this mission, is to go learn from them as best as possible. Capture a lot of that knowledge in knowledge management systems of different types, but get to know them, learn from them, ask them the most difficult questions. It's crazy when you show a little love to them, how much they'll open up their repository and share with you. And you're on a stopwatch here. You got to do this before mass numbers of them retire. Don't let that asset walk out the door.
Okay, I want to pivot really quickly because I want to get into the heart of what we want to talk about, which is actually the humility part of the topic. So, here's a quick question for the audience right now. Humility, being humble, right? That's kind of what we think about. What does that typically mean for you when you think of the word being humble in the workplace? Let us know in the chat function. Does it mean not really talking about your accomplishments? Is this something that you struggle with at work? This balance of talking about your work, but also being humble? I love talking about this word because culturally speaking, growing up as an Asian American, we were constantly told don't talk about your work too loudly. Don't boast. It might turn people off, right? And that just truly set in and it defined the way I showed up in the workplace. Now, it doesn't take long for any of us to see that the people who get the biggest opportunities, the promotion, the big projects, they're just so good at advocating for themselves. And I remember early on, Todd, this would feel like it would just fly in the face of humility. I thought I was supposed to be humble, but how is it that people who are really loud, they were getting all the opportunities? So Todd, here's my question for you.
Mm.
How does one balance, or how does one think about being humble at work, but also still showcasing their capabilities?
I love this question. And I will tell you once again, my favorite scientific answer from back in the day, it depends. So some cultures reward squeaky wheels and the people who say, look at me, the loudest. Those cultures exist, no doubt about it. They care about individual performance more than anything else, and they reward people who say, I'm special, don't you know that? That's true. On the other end of the spectrum, there are people who will look at talented folks, know that they're really talented, and not throw them the same opportunity, accolades, and rewards because they value people as teams, the we, not the I, the positivity, not just the candor. So there are different types of cultures. What I would say to you is, are you, relative to your peers, just build some social awareness here, being recognized appropriately? Don't say to myself, it's my once a month time to go advocate for who I am and what I've done to my boss to make sure I get my just desserts. Say to yourself instead, on average over the last quarter, am I being recognized clearly less than, very similar to, or more than the people who I consider my peers? And you'll start to get a really good idea based on who's getting promotions, who's getting project slots, who's going to lunch with who, etc. There's a lot of social cues one can learn, how others are being treated, relatively speaking, to you. That's where I would start when you ask yourself, am I advocating for myself enough, or not enough at all, or possibly too much?
I love that. It's doing kind of like a quick temperature check of what's happening around you, right? Where do I kind of land? Austin saying, know who you are, who you aren't, and being willing to embrace and be transparent about both. So it's really interesting to see kind of like the people's interpretation of what that word means to them, being authentic and empathetic towards others while elevating them. I love that. Okay, here's another question from
Hmm.
Darren. Hey, Darren. Darren's actually in our membership. So, Darren, by the way, Darren is calling in from Malaysia right now, which, by the
Darren,
way, I don't even know what time it is in Malaysia. Is it like 2 in the morning? Oh my
Darren
goodness.
can't sleep. This is great.
I love it. Hopefully, this is just going to like amp you up even more. Okay, here's Darren's question. How do we show that we're confident without being seen as arrogant?
It's a Darren. You're a budding social scientist. Listen, it depends on context. I keep saying it depends because one given level of acting confident will be interpreted differently in that context versus that one versus that one. How you're judged with any given behavior depends on the prevailing norms in the group that you're in. If advocating for yourself is the norm, acting this level of confident will be seen as acceptable and nothing too much at all. But if advocating for yourself and acting really confident is pretty uncommon for whatever reason, and you act at that same level, you could be seen as a braggart who's trying to push too much of the spotlight on them. So know your context about what's normal and what's not, and how deviant your behavior may or may not be. And after you assess that, this is all about career stuff, not just leadership. Then you're going to come back around to think about fit, like we talked about earlier, and say, am I okay with the norms I just figured out in the group where I work? Do they need to change or do I need to leave? Those are long-term, useful questions to ask yourself as well.
I feel like the theme of a lot of what we're talking about is context is everything. And when it comes to leadership, when it comes to communications, it's hard to give a one size fit all answer. It really is.
Impossible.
Because I can give an answer to you, but you said context, culture, that all plays a role. And I want to say, I feel like most of us are pretty good at having a hunch of what's the situation, what's going on, right? And knowing when it's too much or not enough. Perhaps, Darren, if you're asking this question, how do you show that we're confident without being arrogant? Maybe that's a sign that you know that you have to actually show off a little bit more. The fact that you're asking that shows that it's something that maybe has been brewing inside of you. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the questions that we ask is actually insight into how we truly feel, but we haven't yet acted upon it yet.
I love that. And I think it's actually an interactive reality as well. I mean, you're really focused on humility. I love humility and vulnerability. They go hand in hand. one of the biggest moments in the books when the protagonist shared something he was scared to share with the team because he wanted to be real and let their guard down and see that he's not posturing. He's just being honest in a way that really doesn't even make him look great, but it makes him look honest and real, authentic. And he wanted them to react to that. So you can kickstart this not just in yourself, but with others, with a little bit of small acts of vulnerability, humility, and honesty on occasion to let people react to that. And if they react without ever responding in a similar fashion, you have some cultural insight there that you might need to think about in terms of where you fit long term. But if they reciprocate in a similar fashion, I guarantee you've just taken a step forward in terms of psychological safety and eventually productivity in the group.
Okay, so as we wrap up here, I actually want to end on the last theme of our talk, which is this heart, leading with heart and humility. And I want to start by posing a question to our audience. And similar to heart is the feeling of feeling supported in the
Mm.
workplace. So here's a question for everybody right now. What does feeling supported feel like to you? How does that show up in the workplace? When you feel supported at work, what happens? What does somebody say? What does somebody do? Let us know in the chat function. And I love asking this question because we actually get a whole variety of different answers. What does support mean for you?
Mm.
Okay, as people are thinking about that and writing into the chat function, heart and feeling supported. What are your thoughts about this? And let's go from both perspectives. How can we support other people? And how can we perhaps find more support for ourselves?
I think they're very underrated. So first, in terms of other people, and the science backs me up. I'm saying nothing revolutionary here. The science and common sense tells us we're finally waking up to how important they are to correct team functioning and successful careers. The old saying, you don't know when you meet someone what it is they're going through. Try and be kind. That is so radically true. It's one of those pop psychology things we've all heard. It's so true. It's unbelievable. I have audiences raise hands. Have you ever experienced this? Do you have a loved one who's been through this tragedy? Other things I talk about sometimes. And there's everyone looks around like, oh, you too. I love that they see that and have that breakthrough, because the truth is they're going through a ton, which means that being supportive and helpful to others is often very much easier than you might think, because saying how are you and meaning it, being quiet after you say that to actually listen, letting them get out what it is they need to get out before you jump in to offer your advice you're so good at. Those are profound acts of kindness and support that I think often are in short supply because we're all so busy and focused on ourselves.
Frena saying, my supervisor is authentic and genuine with me. We have real conversations with candor and honesty. I mean, that's beautiful. Tamara saying, recognizing your work, offering opportunities for continued growth, providing resources to support your work. You mentioned something, Todd, about, for me, feeling supported is just knowing that other people understand. Other people understand how hard things are, the struggles. And, you mentioned that thing where you ask somebody, has anybody gone through something like this? And people start raising their hand. And suddenly you're in a room of people where you're like, wow, I'm with like-minded folks.
We're not as dissimilar as we thought. That's a beautiful insight for most people, and you can give it to them with just a few questions.
I love this one. When you do not have to be political in your responses and your peers and managers trust your decisions. Oh my God, that's like, we should do another episode on politics at work
Oh,
and dealing with that. Oh my God. And what last one? Feeling supported is getting constructive feedback honestly. And it coming from somebody, right, that you trust their feedback, right? So
yeah, that's a spectacular one. If you actually think someone has stopped censoring and started getting real with you, no matter how prickly that sometimes might feel, that is a precious, rare resource. Listen.
okay, Todd, first of all, thank you so much for spending this last hour with us and just sharing your knowledge of, your book, Dancing with Monsters. So as we wrap up here, I always like to ask my guests this question. Any sort of golden nuggets that you'd like our audience to walk away with, things that they can remember and do in the workplace?
Well, again, I'm really focused on the book right now. In reference to that, I would say you are imperfect. I know it. It's completely okay. And you're way capable in the face of those normal imperfections if you'll just choose to believe it.
I love it. For those who joined, I want to say thank you so much. And, Todd and I, we shared so many tips, and I know a lot of it went by so fast. We have our VIP pass here, you can see on your screen. It's where we take all our notes so you don't have to write down. And the beauty of this pass is it's for this show and all our shows in the future. So if you've attended our shows, you love the content that we have, grab the VIP pass. The QR code's on your screen right now. Todd, where can people find you? Where can people stay connected with you?
Thanks for asking. My website is www.drdewett.com. That's DEWETT. And LinkedIn is my social platform of choice. Come find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect and chat.
Absolutely. And for those, if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn already, please be sure to follow me or connect with me. I post a lot of communications content almost every day. So if you want communications content, how to be a more confident communicator, be sure to give me a follow there. A quick note. We have another Soulcast Media live event coming up in about 2 weeks. We host these again every other week or so. So if you want to RSVP for that, head to our website, soulcastmedia.com, and you can be sure to join so you get updates on that event and honestly all our other events. So, Todd, I appreciate you so much. And for everybody who joined, thank you. I know we had folks from all over the world. We appreciate your time. And until then, stay connected. Take care, everybody.